I'm Thomas. I'm 78 years old, sitting in my car outside a grocery store in Indiana, realizing I may have lied to myself for most of my life. People think life changes slowly, incrementally, like the turning of seasons. But the truth is, it changes the instant you stop running from it. In a single moment, I didn't learn that until I was 75. For decades, I blamed circumstances. The factory closed down, taking my job and my pride with it. My health declined, the medical bills piling up like autumn leaves. My marriage fell apart, leaving behind an empty house that echoed with silence. I told myself I was just unlucky. That life was a series of unfortunate events that just happened to me, and I was merely a passenger. But that wasn't the whole truth. What I never admitted, not even to myself, was how often I chose comfort over courage. How many times I picked the easy path, the familiar routine, even when it was slowly draining the life out of me. I stayed in routines that felt safe, but they were cages I had built for myself. I waited for motivation to strike like lightning, instead of understanding that motivation isn't found. It's created through action. I was waiting for a permission slip that was never going to come. I was waiting for a different life to begin, without realizing I was the only one who could start it. Then, 3 years ago, everything shifted. I was in my doctor's office for a routine checkup. He finished his examination, put down his chart, and looked me straight in the eye. There was no judgment, just a quiet, heavy truth in his voice. He said, "Thomas, if nothing changes, neither will your future." That sentence, so simple and direct, hit me harder than any diagnosis. It wasn't about my physical health anymore. It was about the health of my soul. That sentence followed me home. It echoed in the empty rooms. It sat with me at the dinner table. That night, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by old photographs and dusty frames. Pictures of a younger man with more light in his eyes. Trophies from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Unfinished dreams collecting dust in the corners of my mind. I saw a man who had accepted his story was over, who was just waiting for the final page to turn. But for the first time, sitting there in the quiet hum of the refrigerator, I knew I didn't want my story to end quietly. I didn't want the last chapter to be one of regret and resignation. I wanted my final chapter to mean something, if only to myself. So I made a decision. I gave myself 90 days. 3 months to see if an old man could learn a new way to live. The first month was about taking the smallest possible steps. I started walking every morning, even when my knees complained with every stride. Some mornings, it was just to the end of the block and back. But I did it. I bought a cheap notebook and committed to writing one honest page a day, no matter how messy or uncomfortable the words were. I made phone calls I had avoided for years, mending fences that I had let fall into disrepair. The hardest part wasn't the effort itself. It was the consistency. It was getting up and doing it again the next day, and the day after that. There were rainy mornings where I stood at the door, every fiber of my being screaming to turn back, to go back to the comfortable quiet of my chair. Some days, I genuinely wanted to quit, to tell myself I was too old for this, that it was pointless. The second month was about honesty. Real, brutal honesty. I stopped pretending I was fine when people asked. I started cleaning out my apartment, not just the dust, but the symbols of my past excuses. I threw away old clothes that didn't fit the man I wanted to become. I faced the silence of my home not as a void, but as a space to be filled with new thoughts. I sat with my regrets, and for the first time I forgave myself. I forgave the younger man who made choices out of fear. That was the turning point. One afternoon, my phone vibrated on the table. It was my daughter. We hadn't spoken about anything deep in years. But she called just to talk, and after a few minutes, she said, "Dad, you sound different." She said she heard something new in my voice. She couldn't name it, but she said it sounded like peace. That was the first proof I had that the change wasn't just in my head. The third month was about purpose. I realized that my journey couldn't just be about fixing myself. I started volunteering at a local soup kitchen, just serving coffee and clearing tables. But in that simple act of service, I stopped focusing only on myself and my own story. Helping others, listening to their stories, it reminded me why I was still here. It gave me a reason to get out of bed that was bigger than just my own personal project. It reconnected me to the world. So here I am, 3 years later. Back in his car in this same parking lot, nothing magical happened. I didn't win the lottery. I didn't suddenly become 20 years younger. But I trust myself again. I know that I am the author of my own story, even at 78. You don't need a year. You don't need a grand plan or a perfect moment. You need a decision and 3 honest months. You need to start today. This channel shares real stories from people who lived long enough to learn the hard way. If this helped you, subscribe. The full story might help someone else too.